make a move and the bunny gets it.
I said, put the bunny back in the box. Why couldn't you put the bunny back in the box?
Psychically, I'm very well endowed.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Let me make sure. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Okay, all right. Evidently, my mic cut out on me. I wasn't informed of this fact, so I pretty much had a nice little chin wag with myself for almost half the show last night. I'm sorry, Monday night. Tuesday night. That's right, Tuesday night. So so that was a wash. Since I didn't have anybody in the chat like communicating with me, it's not your fault, but so I'm my own producer, so I made sure tonight that the mic is working. Actually, they finally told me my mic wasn't working, and so I unmuted, and it was the camera mic. So while I have a crystal clear picture, my sound was awful. So hopefully we can get it all kind of synced up tonight. I got a new chair when it doesn't creak. Didn't quite get it together in time. I'm going to have to go back and tighten some bolts. So if it falls apart, it's going to be hilarity, but that's what's going on. Anyway, just about there and getting there. Just about got everything squared away the way I'm hoping. Got the right camera, got a computer that can handle it, got the streaming chair. Don't have the talent on loan from God like Rush had, but I'm going to do my best here anyway. So come along with me. It's just going to get better from here. Hopefully, I'm going to start getting some guests on. Going to put my shingle out. Start having some people to come by and chill. May change one of my spaces to a chill stream. Anyway, got a couple comments over here. Ashley Guerra. I'm sure I have to roll the R's, but Guerra, maybe, I don't know. Sorry, I'm a hillbilly. Ho, hi. Hey, Ashley. Thanks for stopping by, hanging out with me. So now, anybody thinks that I'm just gonna like trash the boomers all night long? Yeah, it's okay. I appreciate it. Too hillbilly to roll my R's. I mean, I took like 2 semesters of Spanish 1, and all I could ever figure out how to say was "que lástima," "que terrible." I don't think those are good things. I'm not sure. Anyway, so what am I doing? Well, I'm going to decided to do a breakdown of the Boomer generation. Now, I kind of trashed them a little bit from time to time. If you look at my past, uh, but I think what I need to do is I need to make a distinction. Okay. When I say Boomer generation, uh, the Boomer generation is distinctively split. Okay. And thank you. Yep. I appreciate it. Hello, Anna. Hello. Not shades. Thank you. Well, anyway, so the Boomer generation is distinctively split, almost down the middle. Okay. Now, the split comes over the Vietnam War. Now, they instituted a draft. Now they had the draft for the World War II and for Korea, and then they carried that over into Vietnam. They ended the draft after Vietnam, but the draft is a very distinctive time in American history, where essentially people were conscripted into the service. Now, it was a very, very controversial thing. Now, the previous generations, especially, the greatest generation, the ones that are called the greatest generation, they were like, that came out of the Depression. They were hardened. They were hungry. Most of them didn't have more than one change of clothes. Some of them didn't even have boots, or their whole entire life. And so going into the service wasn't as much of a burden. Some of them, it was a career path that they just would not have had the opportunity to before. Possible revenue stream that wasn't available to the general to a lot of people. And so they that generation got conscripted in. A lot of them volunteered, okay, especially after Pearl Harbor. People like Audie Murphy volunteered, But the thing that the next gen then basically a lot of them stayed on for Korea, and then the first generation of the boomers was coming in. Um, Korea was less than a decade after World War II. And so a lot of that personnel carried over into Korea. So a lot of the ones that stayed in. I don't think there was as much of a draft over Korea, but there was a draft. Now, when Vietnam came in, first of all, it was never declared a war. We call it the Vietnam War because it killed so many Americans, one of the highest body counts of any war. But it never was officially declared, and so a lot of people called it illegitimate. And so you got people hitting their teenage years that had come into the range of the draft, and they were this boomer generation. Their parents were, basically had their own homes, had their own houses. There's 2 parents in the home. There's a Christian, ethic there. Most of the church attendance was very high. And so what you got was this generation that came in, and they were pretty much spoiled. Okay. They were, you know, they were a lot more affluent than the previous generation. They the economy was booming because of the World War II. Uh, jobs were plentiful. When my father could basically work a job and support a house, support cars, support family vacations, support educational needs, and but at the same time, the fathers were also, because they're at work, because a lot of them were veterans. They're also distant, and so you had this generation that grew up way better off than their parents, but also with less affection, less contact with their parents, and so it was a perfect storm. Especially since it was called the baby boom for a reason. These boomer families basically had not just one or two; they would sometimes have five, six. Uh, I've seen family numbers. My family, my mother's family, had eight. So so when you say boomer or boom, that was a boom. So you had these massive families. They're pretty decently off. They're a little estranged from their fathers. Um, the whole church thing, they were kind of had it shoved down their throats. And so when they hit their teenage years, so suddenly this draft pops up. So you had a great part of it that split off. And the ones that were like conscripted into the draft and went overseas, they have a different work ethic. They actually had hardship. They actually suffered. They actually had trauma. I had a couple uncles who, my uncle Aiden, bless his heart, never was the same. I see pictures of him before Vietnam and after Vietnam, and it's a different man. Yeah, my one of my favorite people was a Vietnam vet named Roger. And most of the time, if I run across a Vietnam vet, they are cool people. They're just awesome people. And so when they came back from Vietnam, they didn't get the hero's welcome that their fathers and grandfathers did. They got uh, the same people that were anti-war, the same people agitating against the war. With the war ended, they needed a new place for their anger and their bile, and they placed it on the soldiers. And thanks to people like John Kerry, John McCain, creating these narratives that soldiers were committing atrocities. Thanks to Hanoi Jane Fonda coming back over, the PR was awful, and so these soldiers they came back and they didn't even feel like they could wear their uniforms. It was entirely different. But you talk to a Vietnam vet, you saw it when John Kerry tried to become president. You saw them coming out of the woodwork and saying, "Oh hell no, this is not going to happen." And you got a real good view of just the trauma that was still there for a lot of these Vietnam vets. But the boomer generation was had the best head start of any generation before it, and probably any generation since, because essentially a lot of the decisions that were being made that eventually led to the inability to buy a house or a home on one's salary were started back then. Were started, around the time of the Vietnam War. And so suddenly mommy and daddy both had to work. And then you got the latchkey kids, which is Generation X. But I already talked about them. So let's talk about these boomers. Why is this even significant, this generation? They're all in their 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s now. So why are we talking about the boomers? Because the boomers still, for the most part, have a lot of the power in this country. And they're only now beginning to relinquish it. And so they've really left they've really overseen a lot of culture, a lot of the history of our country. They will have become they I think history will prove that the boomer generation actually had control of our society longer than any generation before or since. Gen X is going to have a very brief moment in charge before here comes the millennials and Gen Z. Millennials are already jumping over Gen X in a lot of ways. But basically, what the reason why it's still significant is that we know kind of like talk about the boomers. It's because a lot of what's going on right now is a holdover from the heyday of the boomer generation. These No Kings protests and all these protesting that are going on, check the ages. Look at those videos. Look at the age range of the people in those videos. All gray hair, all retirement age, boomers. Still trying to be the flower kids right there. I think I got that. Did I point that right? Yeah. All right. Anyway, I have to remember it's mirrored anyway. All right. So I got a few video clips to play. Let me go ahead. Let's start with this one.
They're the largest, most influential generation in modern history, the group that invented the corporate ladder, redefined retirement, and, depending on who you ask, either built the world we live in or bankrupted it. We're talking about the baby boomers. But the story of a boomer isn't just about the date they were born, it's about the mindset that was forged in the most unique economic era the world has ever seen. This isn't a critique, it's an analysis. If you want to understand modern work, modern culture, and even your own relationship with money, you have to understand the single psychological factor that molded the boomer generation. And it starts with something they had in abundance that we rarely see today: economic security. To understand the boomer mind, we have to travel back to their childhood in the 1950s and 60s. This was the post-WW2 golden age of Western economies. For the first time, millions of families experienced a new baseline of stability and a predictable path for their future. For this generation, 3 psychological pillars shaped their approach to professional life. Boomers didn't just grow up knowing they'd get a job. They grew up knowing they'd get a career. The social contract was clear. Give a company 40 years of loyalty, and they'll give you a clear promotion path and a secure, defined benefit pension. The psychological result of this guaranteed stability was an extreme emphasis on loyalty and institutional trust. You didn't leave a job because leaving meant risking a permanent setback in a predictable, linear race. It felt irrational. Their identity became deeply fused with their job title and their continuous contribution. For them, hard work wasn't just about earning money. It was the mechanism for deserved, inevitable forward progress. This is a deep psychological conditioning. Contrast it with the modern reality where job hopping is strategic, pensions are rare, and loyalty is often seen as naive. This difference isn't a moral failing on either side. It's a fundamental difference in the psychological contracts of work. Now, this sense of stability wasn't the only influence. Boomers were also the generation of the 1960s counterculture, the civil rights movement, rock and roll, and challenging authority. This seems contradictory. How can you be loyal to the system and yet rebel against it? The psychological answer lies in security-driven confidence. Because the economic foundations were so secure, the younger boomers have the confidence to critique and dismantle social institutions without feeling existential economic dread. They have the energy and safety net to focus on higher-level needs like self-actualization and social justice. They could afford to be idealists. This generational confidence resulted in a powerful belief that if something was broken, whether it was an outdated social policy or a restrictive cultural norm, they could fix it. They had the power, the numbers, and the societal permission backed by underlying economic buoyancy. This sense of personal agency to shape the world is a core defining boomer trait. The final piece of the boomer psychology puzzle is retirement. For many, this has become a complicated stage. While they are, on average, the wealthiest generation, a large percentage are working far longer than previous generations. Why? Psychologically, retiring requires a monumental shift. From an identity based on production and contribution, the core values instilled in the 50s and 60s, to an identity based on being. When your lifelong programming tells you your worth is tied to your job title and your salary, giving that up creates a profound identity crisis. For many, the feeling of being needed in the workplace becomes more valuable than the financial reward of stopping work. The baby boomers are a generation defined by a great paradox. They were conditioned by economic abundance to prioritize long-term stability and loyalty, while simultaneously possessing the confidence to be cultural revolutionaries. They created the structures of modern professional life, then spent their youth challenging those very structures. Their legacy is a world where work is central, but the rules of loyalty and security no longer apply. Understanding this psychological blueprint is the first step in decoding the past 70 years of global culture. What core boomer value do you think defines your generation the most? Let me know in the comments below.
Okay, I didn't get it didn't let me go. It was immediately. All right. So that's the paradox. Okay. Now, he didn't bring up the Vietnam War, but the Vietnam War explains that paradox. Okay. Those who did not go into the draft stayed home. They listened to rock and roll music. They were in Haight Ashbury smoking pot and weed and doing drugs. They were the tune in, generation. And Timothy O'Leary and all that turns out to be MK Ultra. So these people were kind of brainwashed into thinking that the culture was broken, and they were the ones that had to fix it. Atheism, communism, a lot of that stuff was in, and a lot of these people infected academia, and later went into politics and the arts. And so a lot of these people that you find in the arts, academia, and politics from that generation, they are pretty much part of the ones that stayed behind, at Woodstock, free love. And so you got the whole generation that of this cultural shift. And then you got this other group of boomers, because you got to understand, the boomer generation was massive. Massive. I mean, multi-kid family homes. 5, 6 was the norm. And my former housemate that just passed, he had 1, 2, 3 brothers, 1, 2, 3 sisters. We had 2 sisters, but one of them had a daughter that was so close to his age, it might have been another sister. But anyway, so the thing about it is, you'll see older boomer generation really got into the work, really got into economic stability, really got in that upward trend. The ones that didn't go to Vietnam, and the ones that went to Vietnam, they came home and started going to work. And because they missed the education systems, they're the ones that became the electricians, the engineers, the people who kept the lights on. And so you got this whole generation over here that didn't go to Vietnam, that stayed behind and protested everything, and now they're in retirement age. And what are they doing? Oh, we got something to protest. And so they're out there protesting. And so how do you get this generation that basically built the economic infrastructure, built Wall Street, built a lot of these upward mobility chains, um, and then you got this other generation that protested all of it, and now they're all over again. They're protesting it again after they benefited from it. And so this dichotomy is at the heart of why the boomer generation is so mind-numbingly split. They are both the best of people and the worst of people, and they're in the same generation. Because you will have families that basically stretched in almost 20 years. So from the first kid to the last kid, because women basically had children for over a decade, stair steps, one every other year, be a new kid. And because of that, the older boomers tended to be a lot more like their parents, a lot more like the greatest generation. And then the younger generation that came in was like, here they came into economic freedom, they came into upward mobility, they came into education being paid for, and they essentially, because of like the influence of people like the Beatles, like the Beat generation, which turned out to be a lot of MK Ultra. Let's just face it. But they really got influenced by all that free love and stuff like that. And so they took over the reins of, you'll find most of the people that are in charge of like our entertainment, the arts, a lot of older politicians of the boomer generation, and the ones in academia, and you will find they still think of themselves as hippies. They still think of themselves as counterculture, even though they basically have run the culture and they're still at the reins of the culture. They would tell you that they're still rebelling against the man. That's why they love Donald Trump so much, because Donald Trump is somebody they can point to as the man, and they can feel like they're rebelling again. Feel like they're back their old tricks, They put on their paisley jacket and, Nehru jackets and paisley patterns and, smoke weed, which is legalized in a lot of these places now. If it's not legalized, they got a prescription for it. But basically, they're living their second childhood right now. Now, when we see what's happened to our entertainment, is our entertainment got taken over by activism, okay? The reason why is because the 60s, most of the entertainment of the 60s was activist. Okay? When did the protest songs of Vietnam War, when did they come out? They came out during Republican administrations, especially Nixon. Oh man, suddenly they really hated Nixon. Nixon was the Trump of the 60s and the early 70s. They hated Nixon. They hated Nixon just as bad as people hate Donald Trump now. And when they feel like they took him down, they feel like their generation took Nixon down. And the truth is, Nixon was betrayed by his inner circle and the CIA and stepped down so you didn't split the country. He would have probably won if he had gone into impeachment hearing. He probably would have won it. But now that they've set the narrative that he was this evil, vile person who was doing basically what everybody else is doing. But they got because especially Woodward and Bernstein have lived off of that ever since. Because some FBI guy got a wild hair and basically slipped him a bunch of stuff. And so because of that, suddenly everybody coming out of journalism school wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein and take down presidents, especially the presidents they did not like. Okay. They didn't really hate Ronald Reagan that much because Ronald Reagan was a lot more progressive than people want to even admit. Ronald Reagan had a lot of progressive beliefs. That's how he was the governor from California for a reason. Okay. And so they didn't really take Donald Trump down. I mean, Ronald Reagan down, as hard as they did Trump. They still tried to assassinate him. Evidently that's a thing. Which they've already let John Hinckley out of prison, by the way. So, yeah, support his album. Evidently, he's putting out music. Don't know if he's sending any to Jodie Foster, but he's still doing his music. But we're talking about a generation. This is called a dichotomy. Okay, I'm sorry for the big word, but it's called a dichotomy because you got two things true about this generation that are completely, totally opposite, and seem like they're countermanding each other, and yet it's all enclosed and encompassed in this one generation. And you got some of the best music, movies, television. Some of the best we've ever gotten came from the Boomer generation, and mainly to shut up the Gen X. But you got some incredible stuff from the Boomer generation. You got Jim Henson did Sesame Street and the Muppets, and he was a hippie. Okay, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. You'll see pictures of them. Free Love generation. And most of our biggest stars, most of the biggest directors, most of the biggest musicians, the Beatles. Everybody wants to talk about the Beatles. Over here it was the Beach Boys, but basically Brian Wilson, not necessarily just the Beach Boys, but out of the same generation. And so we've got this weird kind of thing where for a while there, they were doing some amazing, like, entertainment, amazing culture. They're putting out some amazing culture. And then suddenly around 2016, the wrong guy gets put into presidency. The absolute wrong guy became president. And suddenly it's like, oh, activism is back in, turned back on. And suddenly we got to change everything. We got to get rid of this guy like we got rid of Nixon. We got to protest everything. We got to, put flowers in the gun barrels. That whole summer of love, BLM riots around 2020. That was 60s, man. That was just like the 60s. I saw there's a book out talking about how violent the 60s were. And we think things are bad now. In the 60s, they had like a bombing somewhere every single week. They had actual domestic terror organizations that were bombing out places, that were, kidnapping people, taking over stuff with military precision. And, those people are now in Congress, mayors. Karen Bass was one of them. Karen Bass was actually part of a group that was cited for domestic terrorism. Now she's the mayor of LA. And so all of these people have direct ties to, you know, activism and violence and agitation. And so what we're seeing, what we saw happen with the culture, what we saw happen, happening in the streets, this is all the same game plan that they initiated in the 60s. And they're right back there. And so it's kind of like you're trying to balance in your mind, because it's like some of the most incredible things that we have come from this generation, and some of the most corrosive, damaging things that are threatening our very fabric of our society have come from this very generation. And they're all side by side. Communism, capitalism, both of them built up by the same generation, opposite ends of it. And so when you talk about the boomers, you're talking about so many different things. Okay, here you go. This is part of it.
Cold War, rock and roll, civil rights, suburbia. These are some of the highlights of the baby boomer generation, a 2-decade explosion of children born in the years following World War II. To give you a better idea of why this generation is so important, here are 5 numbers that you should know. This is the number of people in the baby boomer generation born between 1946 and 1964. They were the largest generation in U.S. history at the time and represented nearly 40% of the population. Boomers grew up during the height of American prosperity, enjoying health, security, and consumer comforts never before seen in American history. This is the number of soldiers in the U.S. military that returned home after serving in World War II. They were eager to start families, hopeful that their children would enjoy a more prosperous America, filled with the ideals and morals they fought for overseas. This is the amount of money that American soldiers got when they came home from World War I. World War II vets had it way better, thanks to the GI Bill. The GI Bill was a piece of legislation that gave them the ability to attend college and buy a home, things that allowed them to be secure in starting a family. The helping hand provided by the GI Bill contributed to the rise of baby boomer prosperity. By the way, for those who don't know what GI stands for, it's government issue, and it was a nickname for American soldiers. This is the percentage of disposable income controlled by baby boomers in America today. And with all that dough to throw around, they're big spenders. And where does most of their money go? Towards travel, health, wellness, and pampering their pets. That's right, that money goes to dog haircuts. Haircuts for dogs. That's it. 2041. This is the year that the U.S. is expected to run out of money for Social Security, the federal program that provides financial benefits for retired people. Boomers are retiring in droves, meaning more people will be dependent on Social Security. It also means less workers in the labor force paying taxes to fund those benefits. 2041 is a long way off, though, and experts believe that raising the retirement age and changing Social Security structure can help save it. Baby boomers were one of the most influential generations in history. They changed American society and gave the next generations the cultural freedoms they enjoy. Without baby boomers, America wouldn't be as free or prosperous as it is today.
Young people in large numbers came out and joined what became known as.
Okay. So, if you want to know why racism suddenly started showing, or at least the accusations of racism started showing back up, it's because they're reliving the civil rights era, the civil rights fight. They have basically they've reawakened the civil rights movement without the situation that it was meant to fight. And so what you have is you have rebels without a cause. And so if you've ever scratched your head, it's like, what are they seeing? What are they talking about? It's like the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was started during the Civil Rights era. And, you know, back then they were actually needed. They were actually, you know, a lot of these civil rights cases that were brought before the Supreme Court and the higher courts of the land were using SPLC lawyers. And so at one time they had a purpose. Now they're basically a fundraising apparatus, and they were running low on funds. And so they started actually paying for their own agitation. They're paying for the people that they were raising funds to fight. And so because they did not have they had the civil rights mindset without the civil rights apparatus in place that they were fighting. Okay, they right now they struck down a amendment to the Voting Rights Act that was essentially segregation. And they're mourning this fact that they struck down this segregation. And it's like, what are you guys fighting against here? Martin Luther King said it best. We're supposed to be evaluating people by the content of their character, not this right here. And yet we see it every day, that this agitation towards, we need more power, we need more positions, we need more of this, that, and the other. And it's like they're using lingo, they're using concepts, and they're using the mindset that hasn't existed since the 60s and 70s. And yet here we are in 2010s, and suddenly we're hearing the same language. We're hearing them sing "We Shall Overcome" at these protest marches. But then you put a mic in their face and you're like, what are you protesting? But it's because they're reliving the era where they were actually felt like they had things that they had to fight. Now, depending on who you talk to, which historical books you're reading, as the actual amount of things going on that they honestly did have to fight. Because a lot of what we've determined afterwards, a lot of this was kind of like perspective based, not historic based. Anyway, so why are the other generations so angry at the millennials? I mean, at the boomers. Why are the later generations so mad at them? Well, here we go.
Lazy, entitled, stupid, selfish, dumb, crazy, lost, ignorant, spoiled, bad, sensitive, snowflake, annoying, fucked, and on and on and on.
That's how millennial and Gen Zers say they're routinely described, according to SUNY psychologist Carla Vermeulen, author of the new book, Generation Disaster, Coming of Age Post 9/11. Who can blame them for being pissed off?
One of the quotes that I used was someone saying, I feel like our generation has been handed a bill for a party we didn't get to attend. So this is really one of the main sources of anger at older generations, at boomers in particular.
Younger Americans have been raised to believe that their leaders lie about everything, that the entire financial system existed to bail out big banks when they crashed the economy, that endless war is the natural state of things, and that they were about to be blown up by terrorists or shot during school at any moment.
I have a chapter in the book called Lockdown Drills in Kindergarten. They literally have had these drills the same way that we had fire drills.
Vermeulen's book looks specifically at people born between 1990 and 2001, but her conclusions are broadly relevant to folks under 40 or so. She says their fears are mostly overhyped. Our focus on statistically rare events such as school shootings have jacked depression, anxiety, and resentment through the roof.
The psychological effect of participating in these drills for young kids, and kids writing wills to their parents and thinking they're literally going to die. And it's security theater. The disproportionate attention and resources that go towards preventing these highly unlikely events relative to the more direct mental health stressors kids are actually dealing with.
But the biggest driver of generation disaster stress and anger, says Vermeulen, are narratives about how climate change is about to destroy the planet in the very near future.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
Whether or not you think that is exaggerated, this is the messaging that they've been receiving. And this is definitely the biggest source of anxiety for them. Like, I would say school shootings are kind of the most acute stressor for them, but their worries about climate change and the future of the planet is truly existential for them. They talk about not thinking that they won't be able to have children, or they don't want to have children because they don't want to leave them this planet that they've inherited. I think that what makes it so hard for them to deal with is they feel like there's so little they can do about it.
Baby boomers who hated their own parents and used to shout slogans like "don't trust anyone over 30" should be able to empathize with how millennials and Gen Zers are feeling. We need to find ways of talking more productively across generations. Vermeulen says that the essential starting point is respect.
To the parents, I guess I would say really listen to them. A lot of them are delightful, they are creative, they are thoughtful, they are far more sophisticated than I was at their age because they've had all of this access to all of these resources, everything that they now have that literally in their hand at their fingertips, and take their concerns seriously because they are valid in many ways.
I'll add to that, we need to have more fact-based discussions that take into account vast amounts of huge social, economic, and environmental progress that we either take for granted or politicians and the press ignore because it doesn't fit their agenda. Extreme poverty has been cut from 94% to 10% over the past 2 centuries. Education and literacy have skyrocketed. Racism, sexism, homophobia have all declined. Global life expectancy continues to increase, and democracy is on the rise. The 2018 UN climate report that supposedly claimed that the world is going to end in 12 years actually says nothing of the sort. Policy analysts such as Scott Winship note that 70% of American 30-year-olds are doing better than their parents were at the same age.
For generation disaster, why are their parents or their grandparents having these negative reactions? Because you don't understand them any more than they understand you, but you could probably try that.
Every generation fights for its place in the world, and there's no question that the same boomers who once sang along to Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'" are incredibly slow to exit the stage and give anyone else a turn in the spotlight. There's no question that millennials and Gen Z are facing unique problems that they didn't cause, but that's also been true of every other generation.
We've just lost the ability to talk to each other and to listen to views, not lost entirely, but it is challenging. Listen to views that are in conflict with our own and try to understand why people have these perspectives.
The best way forward is to treat one another with mutual respect, regardless of age.
But let's try and do that perspective taking from both sides.
Well, it's a good point to be made that the reason why a lot of boomers don't really identify or the reason why the boomers seem to skip Gen X and go straight to millennials and Gen Z is because they still think of themselves as the teenagers. They still think of themselves as the young agitators, the young advocates, these people here, they still think that they're, at Haight-Ashbury and Woodstock. A lot of the ones that are in charge, that is. There's the other generation of boomers, the generation of boomers that seems to identify, or at least seems to have a proper relationship with the younger generation. They are the ones that are more blue collar. They're the ones that like went to Vietnam or went to work instead of academia, and so they tend to be. Oh, hold on. What's up, Wookie? Hey, man. But they tend to they tend to like be the grandparents. They tend to be the ones that dote on their grandchildren or things like that. Because you see a lot of baby boomers that did not, because their parents had all these kids, and because their brothers and sisters have kids, they choose to be single. Single, single with and career based and and so you know you see a lot of people in that generation that are the single way more than their grandparents were single, way more than their parents were single. And so a lot of that dissolution of marriage or a deconstruction of marriage began with that generation, and divorces skyrocketed. And as soon as Roe v. Wade came in, Gen X population dropped off a cliff. Gen X was on, they were on, like, the trend was that they were going to be almost as big as the baby boomers. But then Roe v. Wade made abortion legal across all 50 states. And suddenly the latter half of Gen X just dropped off of a cliff. And the population against replacement has been low ever since. That's no coincidence there. As a matter of fact, since Roe's been struck down, the population numbers have improved drastically. Even though there are, there's still states that allow for abortion. It's still it's not as accessible as it was, and lack of accessibility, immediate accessibility, makes a lot of difference when it comes to these pregnancies and things like that. If a mother has a time to feel that child kick or see it on a sonogram or something like that, then they're way less likely to pursue that avenue. But basically, the thing about it is when you talk about the boomer generation, you're talking about you almost have to like put a misnomer in as to which part of the boomer generation you're talking about, because we have a big tendency to lump them all together, but they are extraordinarily distinct, maybe more than any other generation that before or since, in that there's that dividing line in this generation. Maybe it's because of the the beginning, the brainwashing that came in. The ones that weren't brainwashed, because you see it today, where you have the boomers that have kind of rejected the mainstream media are distinctively different from those who accept what the mainstream media tells them. And the mainstream media is almost entirely controlled by the baby boomer generation, and especially the ones that stayed home, attended the marches. So when we say boomers, we really have to make a distinction there between parts of the generation, because that generation was so massive. Over 70 million were born to that generation. That's huge. One of the largest population explosions this country has ever seen. Ever seen. And so just half of that generation splits off. you see the havoc that we're looking at today. But the thing about it is, given the boomer generation their due, when they were good, they were very good. But when they went bad, yeah. So anyway, but thank you for checking out my new setup. I think I finally got the mic and the cameras working properly. No delays, no fuzziness. Being able to, be able to broadcast in 1080p, which I think is going to allow me to do a lot more than I have been able to do. Go on different shows and things like that and not be ashamed, because of the delays, be able to interact a lot better. So, this is only, this is just the beginning. Thankfully, the mic works. Mic's always been better than my camera. And from here on out, I'm hoping it's going to be about equal. And plus, got a chair that doesn't creak. So that also gives me a little bit more legitimacy. So it's funny because I've listened to my previous videos and it's just like creak, 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 creak. And it's just like, I just look so amateur, and I am an amateur. I'm not going to put on airs, but I am, I got the better camera. So I've always had the good mic. And now I have a laptop that's going to be able to run everything. I've always had the top package on the internet, but looks like I'm going to be able to actually utilize it. So anyway, so onward and upwards, my friends. And, some of my favorite people on this planet and in my entire history of my childhood and adulthood and everything have been boomers. They are both the best generation and the worst generation all at once. And it's almost like you have to go by person basis with this generation because they are so distinctively different. And so when you go to say, damn the boomers, make sure you differentiate. I'm not sure we need a different name for the generation that stayed behind or went into academia, went into, I guess we'll go the Woodstock boomer. And I want to call them Vietnam boomers because that doesn't really, they would not like to be called that. So we'll say there's a difference between Woodstock boomers and stock exchange boomers. Okay. What do you think? Woodstock boomers, stock exchange boomers. I think it works. I think it works. So that's what I'm going to start referring them to. Okay, I'm talking about the Woodstock boomers. Okay, I think that's going to work out better. But anyway, thank y'all for coming and checking me out. This Saturday night, it's going to be a Cryptids and Conspiracies night. Is the Vatican evil? It's going to be the topic. Hopefully, Mr. Wiki can make it. Maybe Abby. I know Crew will be there if nobody's there. Maybe hopefully John's Longbox can make it. But anyway, that's been cool for Telepathic Bunny comic. Y'all have a nice day. Follow the White Rabbit. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.